Not a bad
Hey,
thing.
everybody, welcome back to Wrestling Travels Lockdown Sessions, brought to you every day that we do this. We're brought to you by the guys at True Heel Heat Wrestling over in New York City. I always say if you want to learn something about pro wrestling, check it out. Those guys, I don't think SP3 sleeps over there. Check out their podcast. If you get really bored, check out our podcast. We're trying to do it too. But today we're not going to be bored at all because we are here with a very special guest, Vic from The Awakening. How are you doing today, buddy? Thanks for joining
I'm good
us.
today, brother. Thanks for having me, man. Thank you.
Thanks for sitting through that introduction. I was, I start slow and I build up that excitement. So
That's how you got to do it, Build slow and taper off. That's what we always do.
that's right. So I started this lockdown sessions just during the pandemic. So I want to get an idea of what's been going on, but I want to go all the way back to the beginning. Now, I've done my journalistic integrity, which is, quote unquote, I was on Wikipedia making sure I got some knowledge. So what I always say is that this is either a really good interview or a really good test for Wikipedia. But Vic, can you tell me how long you've been in the business?
Actually, we just passed, or this weekend would be, what year is it? 2020. It's like 20 or 21 years now, because it's actually, I think, I was trying to remember. I always forget when it happens. But I moved to Calgary, I think it was October, Friday the 13th, actually, 1999. And so, I started in the dungeon the next day. So, yeah, it's been a while. I always have a hard time counting the years. You figure I'd know now, being it's 2020. So I guess it's 20 or 21 years.
Yeah, you got a nice even number. Yeah, I'm always, people are always, I can remember the date, the time, and everything, and I'm like, man, I got nothing.
I'm terrible for that stuff, like dates and everything. Like even, I think that one only really, it just stands out to me because it's like the day that I actually moved and was there, and because I moved from a very small town in northern Alberta, it's about 8 hours north from Calgary, and so I always remember that was me leaving home. I was only 18 years old. Yeah, I turned 19 just afterwards, and that's kind of the last date I can remember for anything. Even when I got signed, it was funny because I have a hard time remembering that date, and then I know what time of year it was, and then it was funny because I think when we switched over, when we went up to the main roster, it was almost exactly 5 years to the day. I think it was a week difference from when I had initially signed and started in FCW with WWE.
That's good if they can keep it a year apart, because then when you have a interview show with an idiot like me, you're like, yeah, these dates are bang, bang, bang. So 8 hours north of Calgary. Yeah. So I'm in Wisconsin, so I think I know cold.
It's way colder up there.
Cold. Yeah.
Yeah, Wisconsin and the Minnesota area and all that kind of stuff. It's very similar. At one point in time, I'd driven from Louisville, Kentucky to Calgary and then back again. So I went through a lot of that stuff, and it's funny because once you get up in the northern states, it looks exactly like the southern provinces of Alberta. I remember when I went up from, I think it was North Dakota into Saskatchewan, I was like, oh man, there's no difference. It's all just depressing.
Yeah, I knew. And I spent a couple weeks tooling around Ontario last summer, and yeah, it was a lot just because where I'm at, we're out of Manchester, the company, but the guys will talk to me I can just walk downtown, and I'm like, guys, I live in the middle of nowhere. I'm hot spotting off a cell phone to do everything, and these guys are just like, hey, we just jump on the tube and we're at Nando's or wherever they're at. And I'm like,
the UK is I think it's just because it's so much more cramped in that they deal with public transportation, all that stuff so much better. That's one of the things. It's funny here because I don't go walk around and do anything where I live or any of the places I've lived in the last few years really. But whenever we'd go over to the UK, like everybody just goes out and walks around. You know, it's so much easier to do. Like everything's just always like right there. Um, that's just like to me, it's always cool. I like to go see all that stuff. Like Europe is such an awesome history. You know, especially when you're a Canadian kid or coming from America. The history we see here is so much different, than over there. So
100%. The times I've been over there and been blessed and to travel, it's just to see things that, small town kid from Wisconsin, small town kid
yeah,
from Alberta, man, you never thought you'd see things like New York City, yet alone be looking at a castle in Scotland and
yeah.
stuff like that. As much as now, when you traveled, did you get did they build in like any like days off, like a lot of it, or was it kind of like business? We're gonna do this, we're gonna get back,
No,
because I know with me a lot of times my family would be like, you didn't even send me a postcard, and I'm like, I saw the inside of a hotel, the inside of an airport, did work, didn't
yeah,
get back.
that's pretty much what I used to like wind up like telling my mom and stuff. Like it was always hard. Just like the Euro tours, whenever you do them with WWE, you're kind of traveling so much. Like there's always like travel, travel, travel. You know what I mean? Like you might um, fly in real late one night to go, or even to go like you'd usually go from TV and fly in. Sometimes you would have a day at the beginning, kind of wherever you were to check it out. But then from that point on, it'd be like you go to TV. Well, after TV, it's always late. So it's either you get out and you go back to the hotel that night, or you're going to head on a bus, or you're going to head on a bus to go to the airport, to get on a plane, to then take a flight, to then go get on another bus. And by the time you get at your hotel, it's, 5 in the morning or something. And then, pretty much you'll have time before you have to get ready for the show that day. But everybody's always on their schedule of like, I need to find a gym. If I missed catering, well, now I got to go find food, and then get cleaned up and get ready to go to the show. And so it was always kind of like a very tiring process. But I know like most of the time, like the crew that like we were always with, everybody was so good. Like everybody had a pretty good time together. There usually wasn't any problems. And I think like only occasionally there was like one day I can remember where like Rowan and Connor and myself, we went out and had a walk down to a beach somewhere in England, and we went and had lunch somewhere. And then there was, I think, the only time I really, really got out to go sightseeing was I'd always try to go out when I was in Nottingham, because we were always in such a cool area there around the castle and everything that's like right in the middle of Nottingham. And so there was one day I remember I went to try to go there with like Bailey and Sasha and maybe a couple of the other girls. And we kind of like lollygagged too long on our way there. And right as we were walking up, they closed the gates. And they're like, no, we just let the last people in to do the tour. You're too late. And we're like, oh, come on. So like I missed that. But then when we were in Rome, actually, um, the referee, Rudy Charles, Dan Engler, I don't know what they call him nowadays. But Connor and him and I, we all went to the Colosseum, and we were trying to we were hoping to do like the Colosseum and the Vatican that day. Cause like, man, we were like, man, I don't even know if I'll ever get to come back here. I don't want to miss this. And the Colosseum tour was just so amazing. Like, I can't even tell you, like, for one, it was kind of scary hanging out outside. Um, so busy. And like, it's the only place I could ever say, I was like, oh, keep your hands on your pockets. Cause this is like a pickpocket place. You know what I mean? Like, it was just crazy. Like, there's so many people out there. It was so busy. Um, and then our tour guide was so amazing. Like, I could say when I was a kid and went on like art gallery tours and stuff like that, it was nothing like what that tour was. Like, she just told us basically all exactly how it was. And she wasn't, kind of, smoothing over anything or glossing over anything. She gave us like real truth about everything that we got to see. So we wound up staying way longer on that tour than we expected to, because it was just so awesome. And then I think like we kind of, since we had to like race out kind of, we still went out from there. We went over to St. Peter's Square, and it was crazy because like So outside outside the Colosseum and outside the Vatican, there's tons of people. Outside the Vatican and St. Peter's Square and stuff, it was like dead silent. Like it is just quiet. Like, and you're like looking around, like there's a lot of people here, but there's like no noise. But then there was a place right across the street that we all went and had a beer. We were like, how can we not have a beer outside the Vatican?
That's all. I mean, that's got to be when I see some places like I haven't been to see the Colosseum, or I always think like the pyramids. Like, but when I do see something that it's been on TV, and I'm like, holy, this is crazy. Like you can't. How do you put it? It's like, you know, meeting John Wayne or something. You're like, man, I've watched this person or seen it in everything growing up, and then being there, you just get that feeling of the Colosseum. Impressive.
Yeah, very much so. Like it's still awesome looking to this day. Like even being kind of worn away the way it is, it's still just awesome. Like it's like one of the original arenas basically. So, and I know it was funny, like, as she was kind of like telling us all the stuff about the Colosseum and how the whatchamacallit, their emperors or Caesars or whatever would kind of put on their shows and stuff. It was like we were like, oh wow, pro wrestling comes exactly from this. Like 100%. The system is next to no different whatsoever. It all came down from this. And, you know, if anything, we just don't kill each other or feed each other to lions anymore. So.
You know, in Gladiator, both the Russell Crowe movie and the boxing movie that came out in '89, two of my favorite movies, but just I think I bought that Gladiator DVD one of the first DVDs I got, and watched all the extras, how they filled in like the CGI. I don't know if it was up today or whatever, but of the Coliseum. And then did you ever get
the floor is all open now? You know what I mean? So like they have to tweak with that, but like that stuff's pretty crazy. Like I don't know, I used to be more into games, I guess. I still play a lot, but I can remember one of the Assassin's Creed games, you actually go down in that part of the Colosseum, and I could remember like looking at it in person and thinking back like, oh, they actually did a really good job on that. Like it looks the same. Like it's crazy.
That's all. Did you ever just because we're on the topic, and I'll go back to wrestling here eventually for the people that are going, hey, what are these guys talking about? The pyramids. You ever?
I didn't. I think when
I don't even know if you go anywhere close to pyramids.
They did go, but it was it was before we went up to the main roster, because I remember Seth, when he was NXT champion, I believe he went on the first tour or something, or like the second tour that they'd ever done of Egypt. So I never got to see those. That's one place I'd love to go, but I know it's kind of crazy. They have a lot of strife over there within the country and stuff. So like my grandmother got to go, man, when I was super young, and I always wanted to go, like looking at her pictures and seeing all the stuff. I've always been big into that stuff. So.
Yeah, I never say that I'm a history buff, but when it comes down to it, stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, I guess I am a little bit. Like I want to learn more about that. That's watch a lot of. I guess during this quarantine period, I ended up watching more Ancient Aliens than I ever thought I would ever watch. You know, so
I liked that show for a while, and then when every answer just became like aliens, it was aliens. I was like, okay, I can't.
So, you know how this is so off topic. I discovered that show because back in the day on iTunes, when music releases were on Tuesdays, iTunes would always have like they'd give you a free music download, or they'd have free episodes of TV to watch, and I'm like, oh, aliens, I'll download this. And I didn't watch it for a number of months, and then I had it on. I think I was falling asleep. And they talked about this island off the coast of Australia called Sand Island, discovered in like 1880 something. I think some naval operation was out there, and they said, "Hey, we're out here. We're gonna chart our way out to Sand Island and come back." And they couldn't find it. And they couldn't find it. And, of course, the answer was aliens from the guy with the hair. But they said, like 6 months ago it was on Google Maps. Then they did, like, sonar to the bottom, and there was no – because they thought, well, you know, could have just – the tide broke.
Could have sank maybe.
Yeah, it was like still like 1,000 feet deep and stuff, and
The
of course. But yeah, that I was hooked.
hmm,
Like I get on the conspiracy theories and stuff. But
well,
what? So 8 hours away from Calgary, you make your way down to the Heart Dungeon. But back up even
hmm,
further than that. I'm curious to know because of the area you grew up in.
hmm.
When you first turned on the TV and discovered professional wrestling, like what are you watching? Who's a wrestler that kind of catches your eye when you're
I'm
younger and go, hey,
I mean, when I was so I just moved to actually to that town, the little town in Grand Prairie, from Edmonton when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I'd never seen wrestling or anything. And there was about there was two kids, or there was four kids, but two of them were boys that lived next door. And I can just remember them asking me like, "Hey, you ever seen wrestling before?" I was like, "What? I don't know what you're talking about." And they showed me WWF, like my first WrestleMania, all that sort of stuff. Showed me when it was on TV, Saturday mornings and stuff. And I fell in love with it so fast. And that's all I can like really remember about it. Like just, the first guys that I saw were Hulk and Andre, and then the Ultimate Warrior, Hercules, guys like that. Like that's kind of what stands out in my mind. Like Demolition, LOD. Like I don't think the Road Warriors had come over to WWF yet, but that's kind of what started it. Because then like we would all, we'd be wrestling in the yard doing stuff, and then eventually one of my dad's best friends that he worked with was like, my dad came home one day and was like, "Hey, do you want to go to wrestling tonight?" And I was like, "WWF?" And he's like, "No, it's something else, but it's still wrestling. It's the same kind of wrestling." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to go see wrestling." And it was Stampede Wrestling. And so they were coming to town. I went to that show, and I don't think I'd seen anybody from Stampede Wrestling yet. Like somehow I wasn't quite aware of it. And I fell in love with that too. Like it was just crazy to me. I was like, "Oh, you mean there's more than one wrestling?" And I think when I started school that year, one of my best friends, still to this day, was such a big wrestling fan that he was like, "Oh, do you know about wrestling?" And like I remember we were talking about the Blue Blazer and stuff like that, and it was just like it just kind of continued on. And then like that friend of mine, he had all the wrestling toys like from back in the day, like all the big rubber ones. And so we were just always into wrestling, like from the time I was 6 years old. I fell off for a little bit when I was first a teenager. And I think it's kind of funny because like when I look back now, I didn't even know, but those were like the kind of dark years for a while where like everybody was trying to sue Vince for stuff, and like all the court hearings and all that shit kind of was going on. But I had no idea. Like it was before the internet and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So we weren't really paying attention to that. It was just being a teenager, we just kind of fell off. All of a sudden you like girls and doing other stuff for a while. And I think when I was about 15 or 16, that same buddy was like, "Hey man, when was the last time you watched wrestling?" And I was like, "Dude, I couldn't tell you." And he's like, "Lately, I started going back and renting all the WrestleManias and the pay-per-views like from the video store." He's like, "They're awesome. You just come watch them." And so like then we just started doing that one summer where all of a sudden we're just watching all the pay-per-views we can find, on video cassette. And then it all just started happening again where we're wrestling in basements, we're wrestling in people's backyards, and it was just always us having fun, trying not to kill each other, and stuff like that. And by the time it came for me to like just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, all my friends, and like I kind of was too, we were all into music, playing in bands, being artists, that type of stuff, all sorts of different things. And I was like, man, there's just something I like that was different to me than everybody else, kind of thing. And I was like, I want to wrestle. Like we'd always mess around at school and do stuff. I used to like, this is probably bad to tell if kids ever hear this, but like I used to pile drive my buddies everywhere. Or I got kicked out of art class one time for giving my buddy a razor's edge on the art room table, stuff like that. And so by the time I was like, I should figure out how to wrestle somewhere. You know what I mean? And like that kind of it took some time because like that was just as the internet was getting going. Um, so I'd been trying to find schools at that point in time, but all I could find was like Shawn Michaels, which was way down in Texas, and I think the Warrior had a school kind of at that time too. I remember kind of like looking into that. And then I think there was the Malenkos possibly as well. And I was like, man, I was 16. I was like, how am I going to get down, to the States to try to do this? And kind of like it took a while. Like it was over a course of a year or two. All of a sudden Stampede Wrestling came back, and my buddies happened to see like an advertisement for it on the news, like on the Canadian news channel that we got up there, and they had the phone number and everything. And so like I had two of my buddies both catch it, and one of them gave me the wrong phone number, one of them gave the right phone number, and kind of went from there more or less.
So much in that, the number of interviews that I've done, and just from my own experience, I feel like we've all into wrestling, and everybody had that falling out period and then got back into it.
Yeah, I think if you're a kid,
yeah,
like, because it was funny, like when I was a kid at first, I used to have wrestling posters all over, my room and stuff like that. And then when I was a teenager, it turned into rock stars and girls,
yeah.
And so now it's not quite the same. I probably have more kid stuff around my place now than I did when I was a kid. And I don't have any kids. So.
Well, I find too that whether I get, like you talked about, the big rubber wrestling figures. I had Hulk Hogan as a kid. That was it. It's all we could afford. But then I usually try to check out before the matches if they have vendors. I'm a sucker for buying DVDs with old matches on it, and somebody had those LJNs. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. It's the Warlord. How much is this? He's like, $300. I'm like,
holy shit. Are
you shitting me? And it was this was down at AEW. He ended up coming back the next day with a box of just crusty, because I can't even sell these because all mine are painted up. And I got I think 40 figures, some doubles and stuff for like $25. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. But you talk about the Warrior had that wrestling school. I've just discovered, since I moved back home in the pandemic, in a box, I had written to the Warrior. I got a pamphlet from 1995. The Malenko School of Wrestling when I was a kid, because it wasn't easy, like you said. We didn't have the internet back then. Phyllis Lee would send me letters, and one of them, and I wish I still had it. I have their card, but I remember her telling me about this guy named the Lightning Kid that was just a little bit older than me that I would train with. And then I just talked to Al Snow. I had him on the show a week and a half ago, and I remember from my college dorm, must have got it out of Pro Wrestling Illustrated or something. But I had a phone number, and I'm talking to Al Snow and trying to figure out how I can move to Ohio. I ended up with just going an hour down the road to Eddie Sharkey in Minneapolis, which was great. But there was one there. Yeah. Did you Rowan come out of the same thing? Did you ever see, or I'm sure you have, but Beyond the Mat?
Oh yeah, I saw that. That was that came out right, I believe, as I was starting, or like as I was trying to figure out my way into wrestling.
Yeah, I think it came out.
Yeah,
like 1999.
Yeah, for me at that time, there was so many like documentaries and stuff kind of coming out. I couldn't say it could have been any better, because like I was getting an education in kind of what to expect before I got into wrestling, because of stuff like that. And it's funny, like I met Mike Modest probably a couple years after they brought him down for Stampede, and it was one of the first kind of tours I did where it was him. They had the Musketeer from ECW was there. I don't think that was the one Lance Storm was on, but like even like those two guys, and that was like a little while after. And just talking to Modest, like he was such a very down to earth, very realistic guy, and I was like, man, like you're seeing your journey in that really like helped me. You know what I mean? Like I never had any false expectations like with wrestling, I guess, coming in. I always expected like it was going to take me 10 years at least to even get noticed by WWF at the time, because that was even before they switched it, and I was planning to just do what I can to work around the world. And, I was like, eventually, hopefully I'll get there. And by the time I started training, the business started changing, like completely, like, because that was when Tough Enough started. And I can remember being so pissed off when I would come home from like dungeon practice or whatever, and then like I'd see Tough Enough on TV, and I was like, man, fuck these guys. Like, but like now even like I know a bunch of the guys that came from the original ones, and just seeing that stuff, and it's WWE's that's when they kind of went over to entertainment. They just started being entertainment more than anything else. And that the only thing that I think changed with that was just how they went about looking at their talent. It's just the process all of a sudden was different. All of a sudden, developmental territories were kind of popping up and stuff, and trying stuff that way. And even to this day, developmental changed while I was there, like 2 or 3 times. So by the time, like, even when I was in OVW, I wasn't under contract, but I got to see how it worked. I got to work with Al and stuff like that there. And Danny, and Rip, they ran everything exactly. It was a developmental system, even after WWE was gone. They didn't switch the way they ran anything or how they were teaching what we were doing. And then seeing like the newer version in FCW. And it was funny because like in FCW, even before like NXT happened and everything, they're like, the coaches would kind of talk to us and say like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had a bigger place, if we had, more stuff to, if we could start touring around more different shows. And we we're like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And then all of a sudden we moved to the Performance Center, and that was like a whole new system there, a whole new thing. And we were doing more shows. And then, we missed the next part where like also they actually started doing international tours and doing more like shows out and about. And granted, like at that time we were ready to go. We were like, we'd already been there for 5 years doing that. But just watching those system change so much, and even now, like knowing how much the system has changed since we were gone from there, it's wrestling's always evolving. You can't really stop it, especially not with that company.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm a huge talking with Big Kon, earlier, letting him know here in the Midwest, I grew up a huge AWA fan. And I'm like, I love the AWA, but they go back to like Vern didn't really change his ways and evolve, and look, and it was out. Vince bought him out, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's constantly changing. I try to wrap my head around the stuff that they do now, and try not to sound like I know what I'm talking about. But I went off, not off, but on our podcast, like the night of the death match, like was death match after death. Some of these places, specifically over in Wrestling Travels neck of the woods, I'm like, guys, the steel cage match and all this stuff, that's supposed to be a blow off to like the end of a feud and this and that. Like, but then I'm going, listen to me talk. If they're putting asses in the seats, then I should shut my big mouth, So I'm like, it is what it is. I guess a little something out there for everybody.
Yeah, wrestling has so many different like types of fans and types of workers. You know what I mean? Yeah. And everybody, I've known guys who tried to just be a wrestler forever, and was like, man, this just isn't working. This just isn't working. And then all of a sudden he stabbed himself in the head with a coffee pot one day and was like, oh shit, this is my deal. I love doing this now. This is what gets people going. I'm like, whatever works for you, Yeah. And like, I can remember the first time I saw, man, it was one of those death matches from like, what was it? Big Japan or somebody. But it was like when Terry Funk used to work, Mr. Pogo, and like they'd have exploding ring and the barbed wire. And I can remember the first time sitting there watching that stuff just after I'd started wrestling. And I was just like, I was just like mortified watching this. And I was like, how the fuck does anybody do that? So, it's funny because like I do like I like using weapons and stuff, but I have no desire really to wrap my head in barbed wire or explode a bunch of light tubes on me. I've seen the pain that those guys go through for that. I'm like, yeah, I heard enough already.
Yeah, no kidding. I just can't imagine the amount of risk that you're already putting out.
Yeah.
And then adding that, like my hat's off to them.
Yeah.
And I know people that'll do that shit every night, and I'm like, wow.
I remember when I met Necro Butcher, and I was like, am I talking to the same guy I've seen like do what he does in the ring. Like, this is nuts. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. The staple guns and stuff.
oh
Oh,
yeah, everything.
dude, I
Oh man.
step on a Lego
Yeah.
and I'm down for a week, and these guys are throwing thumbtacks on the ground and just
Yeah, exactly.
repeatedly. Yeah, the reason I brought up Beyond the Mat is one of the other things. That guy, the Michael Modest, was training at
Hmm.
Pacific Coast Pro, Roland Alexander.
Yeah.
When I was looking for a school, I must have called them. I get a call in my dorm one day. You'll appreciate this story.
Hmm.
It's Roland Alexander on the other end of the line telling me, who I obviously had reached out to him. He didn't
Yeah.
just get my number back then. That I was on a national list, top 100 pro wrestling prospects, which is like kind of my introduction to the carny work. Because I'm like, dude, I know nothing like that exists, but
Yeah.
but it's just another guy after the $5,000. Because if you don't, your friends don't see that commercial on TV.
Yeah.
I've talked to so many people nowadays that are training. They can go on Facebook and so many people, oh, I'll train you. In fact, it's one of my issues that I think happens, with had time to think about it during the pandemic is it was $5,000 to train back when I started. Now
Yeah.
people are going, hey, kid, I can train you for like $400. And I'm like,
Yeah.
God, who trained you? And I got to go back
Yeah.
about 17 generations before it's a name that I actually
Yeah.
recognize. And being around the business, I would think I recognize most names. But yeah, I'm going to sound like the grizzled old veteran here going, the kids these days, just to be
Yeah.
able to jump on Facebook or whatever and
Well, I think
find a school.
like it's wacky now. I think because it's so much different. Like even when I started in the dungeon, like I had to pay $3,000 to train in the dungeon, and like when I was a kid, like I saved up money for quite a while just to do that, and like I watched probably about in my first year there, I probably watched about another 100 kids come and go that came from all over the world. Um, and a lot of them paid their money and they'd be there for a month or two and then they'd be gone because carny, you know what I mean? Bruce was a carny master and the rest of the family, um, they were very good at kind of making up for that. I would say like everybody tried to take care of everybody down there, like Ross and, all the sisters and stuff like that. They were very good at taking care of people when they came around and if they needed more help, like a lot of kids stayed at the house. They would try to find guys work, you know what I mean? Things like that. And, but I saw it was carny. And like the way Bruce ran his shows was super carny too. So it was always it was very good preparation for everything else that kind of like would come up later in travels, I guess. But, it's that kind of stuff now. It's not the same world anymore nowadays. Like shit like that doesn't fly. Like, when I heard some of the stories from, a couple months ago where people are speaking out about stuff, and I was kind of like, some of this is just wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, and that's maybe just how I look at it. Like, I obviously, especially being in the corporate world of WWE for so long, I understand what's not acceptable nowadays. But at the same time, to me, I always thought like, well, when I got into wrestling, like I expected this. Like there wasn't really anything I ever heard that surprised me in wrestling, or things that came up. And like it's carny. Like used to be an old boys business, just like anything else. And, nowadays with the world changing in so many different ways, and probably for the better, I'd always say, like, I'm not saying like, oh, people are complaining about nothing. Like, no, people have the right to complain for sure. Um, it's good to see. So I think too, also now there's a pandemic, people usually can't make money. So it's good to see when schools can flourish, you know what I mean? And get students in. I think nowadays there's probably like my guess or just like the take on it is there's a lot more people who have a better understanding of like old school and where we're at now in the business. And I don't think a lot of the guys, at least that I know who run schools, they're not just there to rip people off. They're not just there to take their money. They're there to actually like turn people out and to make money and to make people happy. You know what I mean? Like we've all seen it. There's enough horror stories that come out of, you know, training to be a pro wrestler. I saw way too many people who probably should have gone and done something else with their money, but you know what I mean? Everybody had a dream. So I'd never knock anybody for following their dream, but like, man, sometimes when you've had to do what people do to save up thousands and thousands of dollars to go be a wrestler, and then say you get hurt, you know what I mean, in a month, well, the trainer ain't giving you any of your money back, and now you got to figure out what to do with yourself and you're hurt for the rest of your life. So
Right. And you're not talking just saving up for school. You still got room and board and everything. And
yeah,
you're a young kid. I was always surprised at the amount of people. Now I'm not the peak of physical perfection now, but back 20 some years ago, the people that would come in that are just, expecting. I see
yeah,
this on TV. Like I forget who the wrestler was that always said, "Yeah, you're gonna have a beer and eat your chips, and then all of a sudden think you're gonna come down the arena and stuff." And that's kind of what it was,
yeah,
because I remember people would, "Oh, wrestling's fake, this and that." And I'll tell you what, the first day I stepped into that ring, I
yeah.
was like, "I've been there with from the UFC, Brad Kohler's on the other side," and I'm going,
Oh, okay.
"Frick, I kind of hope this is." I kind of shit my pants here a little bit. February,
Yeah,
there's one little space heater. The mats rock hard, and I'm like, well, let's
yeah.
we'll find out really quick here what's going on. But I'm kind of open. And then after that first day of training, I'm just curious if you had the same thing. I've talked to a couple different people about this. Watch wrestling all my life as a kid, big fan. And then
Mm.
after that first day, he says, go home and watch Monday Night Raw and Nitro. And you can't watch it the same. All of a sudden, it was that like almost like the Wizard of Oz moment.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't. I remember even just seeing something in the dungeon where you guys were working, and just something that I saw was like a whole new world. Like everything just looked different, and it's been really hard for me to kind of watch wrestling ever since. I think, or at least I started watching it in a different way. And for probably, well, there was probably a good decade, where I couldn't get enough wrestling, and then even in developmental, like I still watched a lot of wrestling. And then by the time we were on the road full time, I was kind of watching wrestling every day, but not, you know what I mean? I wouldn't watch anything else because like I just get so burnt out by it. And even nowadays, during the pandemic, there's only certain things I will watch because if I find, I had to kind of take myself out of being like cranky, I guess, take myself out of my cranky pants. And it comes from just, I had a lot of old school trainers. So like in my brain, there's certain things that just like react, and it's not a bad thing, but at the same time, I've got to like adjust myself for what I see. And I don't want to watch wrestling to be critical on it because most of the time what I do see is guys just busting their ass, and especially nowadays watching guys in empty arenas and stuff like that. I know what that feeling's like, and it's awful. And like it makes me shudder a lot of the times when I watch guys doing something and I don't hear what I know we all want to hear when we're working. So it just makes it tough. Like we did too many days at FCW. We used to have to go do empty arena matches and stuff like that. And it's just shitty. It just feels shitty.
Well, I look back at when we were wrestling travel. We've got fans ready to go to Tampa Bay this
Yeah.
past April. Obviously, everything gets canceled, but then I watched that, and when Kevin Owens jumps off that sign, I think was he wrestling Seth at the time? Whatever. I was like, man, there's nobody there. Like, if you're gonna jump off something, you kind of got that adrenaline feeding off the crowd, and like, all right, I'm gonna do something stupid. But my hat was off to him because I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, that's got to be 10 times as tough with nothing. There's no crowd noise, nothing. So my hat's off to him. And pro wrestling is,
Yeah.
through this pandemic, the only thing that has really, it's been hard to watch. It's proven that the fans are a really big part of it, but it's
Yeah.
the one thing sport that didn't stop for us. It kept going.
Yeah.
It kept
100%.
giving. So we'll get back. when you start, did you actually, you got to compete for Stampede, right? The renewed Stampede.
Yeah.
What led to you just busting your balls trying to get your name out there? How did you finally start working stateside and get into like Florida Championship Wrestling?
Man, that took a
A huge
long
story.
time,
I
actually.
know, yeah.
It's not so much a huge story, but just being a Canadian kid, Canadian indie wrestling is like, it's kind of harder than it is in the States. Like, everything in the States is a little bit closer together. So Canada, oh, man, it was tough back then because everybody, like, you're so spread out everywhere. Like, the East Coast had kind of like a big kind of wrestling scene over there, independent wise and stuff. But like, holy cow, for us to get from Calgary to Winnipeg was a 12-hour drive. And so there was only, I went out and did a trip with Don Callis and Tony Condello. It wasn't the Death Tour, but it was like we did a little tour around like Thunder Bay and Winnipeg, and we did another couple towns. I can't remember. But so even then, that was probably like, it was a few years after, because like we'd only, Stampede luckily like wrestled around quite a bit, and they would always do like road little town shows and stuff like that. But like the drives were always so long, that it wasn't until I'd already gone to Japan once. I'd been in England, and I came back, and my ex had gone down to Louisville for a tryout at OVW, and they kind of invited her back to join Rip Rogers' class. And at that time, I was just like, oh man, I kind of just wanted to keep going overseas. Like, some of the guys who were over working for Dixon when I was there, they'd been in OVW and kind of done similar tryouts, given me their opinion on it. And I was like, I kind of just want to keep money continuing to wrestle and stuff like that. And I can't remember what happened along that way, but eventually I was okay. We're going to OVW. You know, we're going to move to Louisville, and I'd gotten my dual citizenship because my dad was an American who became Canadian. He was a dual citizen as well, so I was able to get my dual citizenship. And I just remember I called Rip probably like a week before I was there. Like, I'd already like planned to move because, like, you know, my girlfriend who'd gone down, she'd actually got an apartment there. I think she got hurt while she was there, came back to Canada and kind of rehabbed, and then we moved back down there. And I remember I called Rip a week before, and I was like, hey, I'm moving to Louisville. You mind if I come train with you? And he said a bunch of Rip Rogers stuff like, oh, how big are you? How long have you been working? All this stuff. And he's like, all right, well, I probably won't see it. And he hung up the phone. And I was, you know, I laughed about that. I was like, yeah, he was exactly how I'd heard about him. And then I showed up a week later, and he's like, oh, shit, you actually showed up? I was like, yeah, I wasn't calling to just pretend. And he's like, all right, well, see what's going on. And it just kind of took off from there. Like, I was in OVW for about 3 years. And really, like, it was funny because I didn't have like a big desire to be in WWE at the time. I just wanted to wrestle. And I was just kind of trying to get down into the States and kind of break out and do some stuff here. And then I just kind of got obsessed. Like, when WWE pulled out, we had guys like Joey Mercury and Nick Dinsmore and Roadkill and Rob Conway, who are all kind of like there, and they were helping out and just helping us so much, and showing us so much that all of a sudden I was just driven. Like, I was like, this is all I can see. And, you know, I just, you know, worked towards that. But even then, I spent 3 years in OVW. I got a tryout in FCW. Came back from my tryout, and a month later, Ty Bailey was like, no, we're not going to hire you right now. And I was just like, well, fuck. So, you know, then it was, I went back home for a year. I went back home for a year, and then I got signed. So, you know, it was kind of stupid, but that's how wrestling goes. And that was almost exactly 10 years after I'd started. So.
So then you are a two-time FCW champion, right?
Yeah.
You are the
Yeah,
heavyweight.
one time I held it for 15 minutes, And the other time was for about 24 hours, I think. That was about it.
Yeah, that's
So
2 time. I know I always talk to people when they're like, oh, the titles, this and that. And I'm like, well, you know what? Your name's in the books. That's kind of cool, when you look back
yeah,
on it, at it all. Because I always get to people like, hey, I trained and I'm not a mark. And I'm like, bullshit. We're all
yeah,
marks. So it's
yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah,
Um,
man. I know
so,
it's
so,
funny to me because like we used to always laugh because like Mike Dalton, now known as Tyler Breeze, was also FCW champion, and we used to laugh that we both had the same banner, so because there wasn't one for either of us.
so who do you beat? Do you beat Seth and then Bo Dallas,
The
or
the first time I beat Seth, uh, it was in. I remember that match really well. Actually, that was a sweet match, and it was in Crystal River, Florida. And we had a hell of a match. And then Bo Dallas had won a Money in the Bank gimmick on the show earlier. And so right after I'd won, with actually the help of Byron Saxton in one of his only evil appearances that I can remember, which he was actually so good at. Yeah, he helped me win, and then Bo managed to beat us both up and take the belt out. And the next match, it might have been Bo. It probably was. It was a triple threat match with Moxley and Bo and myself in Punta Gorda, Florida. And I remember being completely shocked that I was the one who won the match that night. That I know it had different reasons for why it was me. And then I believe I lost it the very next night to Richie Steamboat.
right?
And
Okay,
I,
I
th- I
didn't
think
remember
in I think in Brooksville. I could be wrong. It was Brooksville or another town. I feel like it was Brooksville though. So
like I told you at the beginning here when we're off camera, sometimes I go off on a tangent, but I got to back up now because I realized I missed an important question that I want to ask. You get over to Japan, I think, before FCW, but
yeah, way before.
you got any good Scott Norton stories for me at all? Or what was it like? A good guy? I haven't met him.
Oh, he
Looked
was
up
the
to him as a
best.
kid. Yeah.
I was so excited because he was one of my favorites in WCW at the time.
Yeah.
And so there was just 4 gaijin on that tour, and it was myself, Brian Danielson, Josh Barnett, and Scott Norton. And Scott Norton was such a treat. I just remember like Tyson Kidd had told me before because he'd done a couple trips with him, and he was like, "Just don't make annoying noises around him." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "So like if you're in a car and you open the door and it dings." I was like, "Yeah, like the ding, ding, ding." He goes, "Yeah, don't let that happen around him." I was like, "Why?" He goes, "It drives him insane." And so for the whole trip, actually, it was pretty good. Like nothing crazy ever happened. He was just super nice. Like he was super nice and helpful. Um, like I couldn't have asked for somebody better really to be on tour with because like Brian had been there a few times at the time, but wasn't as familiar with his way around certain things. And Scott just could help us out with anything. We were working matches with him and stuff all the time, like doing 6-man tags. Me and Brian used to like sing the over the top song to him, but we'd change the lyrics all the time before he'd go out, and he'd just be like, "Come on, kids, shut up. You guys are really getting me going." We're like, "Well, we don't got to fight you out there. It's fine." Stuff like that. And I can remember one day he took us to go to a gym he really liked, and I can't remember which city we were in, but he takes us to this place, and so we're in the cab, and the cab keeps like, I don't know, the radio keeps going off or dinging or something, and none of us speak Japanese. And Norton's like, "Hey, can you turn it down? Like, shut that off." And like the thing kept going off until finally he's like yelling, "Shut that off, shut it off." And then he looks and he's like, "We're close enough, let's go." He's like, "Here." He just threw money at the cabbie and got out, and we are like, holy shit. Like we started to get scared because we thought he was going to just rip the seat out of the cab or something. And then his pre-workout, I believe, was he had about 3 espressos at this little coffee shop underneath the gym that we went to. And I just remember watching him sit there and pound these until he's like beat red, and he's like, "All right, I'm ready to go." And it was just he was just amazing. Like he was just always so intense, and then he'd be the nicest man in the world, helping us out and everything. And was pretty cool. I had a lot of fun with those guys. So.
Yeah, this sounds really stupid, but I almost forget the WCW stuff because I'm such an AWA. I remember when they first brought him in and he was challenging Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan to the arm wrestling match. And then recently, I think it was like 89 or 90, right before the AWA went under, Flapjack Scott Norton and Yukon John Nord were a lumberjack tag team.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But
yeah, I never got to see any of that, but I know the names from stuff I've seen back then.
Yeah. No, I'm always trying. WWE bought all the AWA stuff, so I can't find it anywhere. They only got like 8 episodes on there, so I'm currently negotiating with people on the internet. Like, does anybody have any AWA tapes? And somebody wants to sell me a Google Drive, but I don't even know how that works, so I don't think I can.
Yeah, I know. I think I've got the DVDs of a bunch of stuff. I think it might have been the ones that WWE put out, but I think that's all I've got from AWA footage.
Luckily, I got some on VHS that back in the day, before everything went streaming, I bought a DVD recorder and was able to because I taped it off TV. So I've got like 6 episodes, but what I'm always fascinated with, and it might be because it's 2020 and sitting around the house all day, that I'm like, man, I want to try to discover stuff that's out there that I just haven't seen before. One of the things I've always wanted to do and look up, and I've talked to a couple people about it, is like missing moves, like the atomic drop, the abdominal stretch, stuff that you don't see anymore. I almost think that somebody could do some type of gimmick, just bringing back all these.
No, I feel like the atomic drop has never been gone. I feel like I've always seen it. I remember there was always guys in matches I was in who would do it, and even I was up at a school just 2 weeks ago, and there was a kid that wanted to work on them, and I was like, "What? Really?" And then like the idea that he had was actually really cool. I was like, "Oh, I like that. That's super cool. Do that," So yeah, I don't feel like that one's missing. I just remember when Terry Taylor used to tell us how we should sell it and his name for it. And then I remember hearing, this was funny, I used to take them all the time. And I can always remember Charles Robinson saying, "Don't grab your balls." I was like, "Charles, what the fuck? What am I supposed to grab?"
Well, for a while when I was talking about it, I go, "Hey man, Honky really sold that well." And somebody, like, how did I forget this? They're like, "No man, Rick Rude sold that atomic drop."
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, because
he did.
You're not even thinking about Rick Rude, but as soon as somebody says that, my mind goes right to him, shaking it up.
Oh yeah,
and
I can picture it right now just thinking about it.
Yeah. Outstanding. And that's something that, like, when you get a guy of that stature, and I'm like, I immediately can go, yeah, I see that from a kid. I haven't thought about it in 30 years, and that image immediately, like you. Russian leg sweep. I saw Kylie Ray pull one off in, I don't know, I can't remember who she wrestled at Warrior Wrestling. We were lucky enough here. Warrior Wrestling ran, independent thing out of Chicago ran August 7th, the first night.
Oh, gotcha.
That in North America, largest crowd, socially distanced, 500 people on a football stadium.
Nice.
And then they did 3 shows in September because it was success. And I remember they were asking, like, hey, any matchups? And I put your guys' name up there because I wanted to see the Awakening versus the North. I thought that would be a really cool.
Shit, yeah, that would be cool. I like those guys. I don't think I've ever met them, but I know they're one of the. I've watched a bunch of their stuff on TNA. They're pretty good. They're real good.
Yeah, there was somebody like a year ago that I think I'd heard of the name but never really watched. But we sponsored Impact's Bound for Glory the previous year, and I got to see them live, and I'm like, holy shit, I've been sleeping on a lot of these guys in Impact. They were fun to watch. So
yeah, they're pretty cool to watch. I do there's some of the guys I really do. I appreciate what they do and what they're doing with their work. That's good. So.